Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Kangaroo Court Uncut Podcast. My name is Rob Cameron, and with me, as always, Shane Dowling, who again has been doing some rather intrepid digging. Focus this week again on the National Anti-Corruption Commission. A little while ago, we spoke about an issue with a couple of investigations into Chief Commissioner Paul Brereton. And when we last spoke, Shane, it looked like there was going to be a couple of more serious investigations into some potential corruption within the commission, but all of a sudden the appetite that we saw from the investigator seems to have disappeared a little.
Look, looking back in hindsight, it was already in progress when we last spoke about it, and what I mean by it was already in progress, she was planning on sweeping under the carpet the inspector of the NACC's Gail Furness, SC, a barrister from Sydney, and she's done that. She swept both corruption complaints under the carpet because the NACC Commissioner, Paul Brereton, has resigned, and the two corruption investigations were into his conduct. And exactly what they are, well, we'll probably never know. We know one, and that was in relation to him continuing his relationship or position within the Australian Defence Force while overseeing investigations into the Australian Defence Force, potentially corruption investigations. The other one, we don't really know what it was about. They've kept it pretty much secret. They've given a few details, but exactly what it is, who knows? The report, she's put out a statement last week, and the bottom line is she's not going to investigate because, one, Paul Brereton resigned, and number two, because it costs too much, she says. Problem there is, only a few months ago, she told the Senate hearing, and Senate estimates hearing, that she had enough money to conduct her role. And one of her key roles is to investigate corruption at the National Anti-Corruption Commission. So she can't have it both ways. She can't say, yes, I've got enough money. Then on the other hand, say, oh, look, I'm not going to continue investigating because it's a waste of money. That's what her job is, to investigate, to keep the National Anti-Corruption Commission honest. And by failing to investigate, and one of the reasons given is because National NACC Commissioner Paul Brereton has resigned, well, she's saying to all others there, don't worry, you get caught acting corruptly and I start investigating, all you have to do is resign and you'll be sweet. That's the message she's sent. Now, it's worth looking at, before we have a closer look at that, is what happened in 2024, because this was actually the second and third corruption investigation into Paul Brereton, the National Anti-Corruption Commission Commissioner. The first one was back in 2024, where he abused his position. He claimed he recused himself in relation to the robo-debt referrals from the Royal Commission, but he hadn't recused himself. And the reason we know that for a fact is because a reporter at the Guardian newspaper put questions to the National Anti-Corruption Commission, and they responded, and the response was basically admission of guilt. So what they did, they had a meeting to determine, or final meeting, to determine whether they'd investigate the Robodebt 6, who were referred to them from the Robodebt Royal Commission. And at that meeting, Commissioner Paul Brereton said he recused himself. And at the meeting, there was 3 other deputy commissioners and also the CEO of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. And he claims he recused himself and told them he had recused himself. But then he goes on to say, if they asked him questions, he would answer those questions. Well, hold on a minute, the deputy commissioners and the CEO. That, number one, staying in the meeting is not recusing yourself. Number 2, answering questions they're putting to him isn't recusing yourself. And number 3, he said in the response that even if they didn't ask questions, he felt there was information there to give, he gave his opinion. So he'd arc up himself and give his opinion at this meeting. Now, all 3 things say there was no recusal. It was an admission of guilt. He stayed in the meeting, he answered questions if they had any questions, and he gave his opinion even if it wasn't asked for. And what the 4th thing that makes it really bad is because he's the boss, he's the commissioner. They were subordinates of his. So if he's in there giving his opinion, well, he's really making a statement of fact that they've got to follow, not, nothing less than that. And you have to realise that. So when they had the investigation back in 2024 of him failing to recuse himself, they had to make a finding of him being guilty. There was no choice because that information was in the public domain, that he was guilty of failing to recuse himself. So what they did, Gail Furness, the inspector of the NACC, she hired Alan Robertson, a former judge of the federal court, and he came in and made the bare possible minimum finding that Commissioner Paul Brereton had erred in fact or law. Well, he hadn't erred in fact because there's no facts there to err in. So he had erred in law. He didn't know what recusal meant. He didn't know what to do, which is total garbage. He's one of the most senior judges in the country. He was a judge of the New South Wales Supreme Court, Court of Appeal. A first-year law student knows what recusal means and knows what you need to do. A recusal, if a judge is on the bench and he or she recuses themselves from a matter, they hand it back to the registrar and they never see it again. They never have anything to do with it again. So Paul Brereton knew he should have walked out of that meeting when they were deciding whether to investigate the rowboat at 6. He should have walked out of that meeting and had nothing to do with it. And he's admitted staying in the meeting, answering questions, giving his opinion when he wasn't even asked for his opinion, and being the boss is the overriding factor where they're his subordinates and they've really got to do what he says.
Yeah, I think the important thing to remember there too, Shane, was that the concern with Paul Brereton was the previous working relationship and social friendship relationship he had with senior bureaucrat Catherine Campbell, who was named as someone to be under investigation during Robodebt. So that relationship was deemed to be far too close for him to be engaged, and to say that he wasn't there, and you've just provided the evidence, even evidence that he provided himself, that he remained there, but he remained there in quite more than just an observational capacity. So it clearly affected the outcome of the investigation. So definitely worth more of a look at, but once again, overlooked.
Well, the thing is, in relation to Catherine Campbell, I wrote about it a lot. I actually broke that story a year before it happened. So a year before the Robodebt scandal blew up, the NACC sweeping it under the carpet, I was publishing photos of Paul Brereton with Catherine Campbell at various Defence Force functions, presentations, and her husband as well. Her husband apparently knows Paul Brereton quite well. So I was publishing all these photos saying, hey, this could be an issue. And it turned out it was an issue. And exactly right, Paul Brereton should have never been anywhere near the matter because of that. But I think the other thing that I need to raise is too, that you had 3 senior people, deputy commissioners of the National Anti-Corruption Commission, and a CEO of the NACC, who was a former CEO of the New South Wales Independent Commission Against Corruption. He would have known too that the recusal was a smokescreen. It was dodgy. It hadn't happened. The 3 deputy commissioners would have also known. They all conspired with Paul Brereton to sweep the Robodebt under the carpet, Robodebt referrals under the carpet. They should have been investigated as well. So when Gail Furness hired Alan Robertson to come in and investigate what had happened, he should have had open slather to investigate them all, but he wasn't. He was confined to investigating Paul Brereton. That's where the big cover-up went down as well, from Gail Furness. So you need to take that on board when having a look at her latest conduct, where she swept the 2 current corruption investigations under the carpet into Paul Brereton, because that makes it 1,000 times worse. It's like a criminal who's getting sentenced. If he has form on the board, has prior convictions, well, he's getting a longer sentence. And the same with Gail Furness. She has form on the board for protecting Paul Brereton, and she's really got to go. There's no way around it, because she said to, like I said before, she said to the National Anti-Corruption Commission staff, hey, no worries, if you get busted, I start investigating, all you have to do is resign and you're sweet.
Well, let's come forward to this particular one, Shane, where David Shoebridge, at the previous look we had at the Senate estimates, and I do recall you made the comment about finances, and more importantly, she was asked if she had finances and resources to go ahead with the investigation. She replied yes to both, and that was a couple of months ago. And then last week's Senate estimates, you've uncovered the fact that she has put the investigation aside due to a lack of finances and resources. That's a pretty soft out.
Well, I've got it on video. If people go to my website, Kangaroo Court of Australia, and they click on that article, I've got the full video, the 16 minutes evidence she gave to the Senate estimates hearing a couple of months ago. She has to go before the Senate estimates hearing every 6 months or so. Then there's also a National Anti-Corruption Commission Oversight Committee, which I think she has to go before them once a year. And she went before the Senate estimates a couple of months ago. And David Shoebridge actually asked her, the budget has just come down. Have you got enough money? Words to that effect. She says, yes, I'm fine. In relation to the current investigations, have you been able to get enough resources, which means employing probably a barrister or two to investigate? Yes, I'm fine. So she said she's fine. And I'll show that video now. People can go to the website and watch the full 16 minutes, but I'll show you that 10, 15 second segment now so you can see it for yourself.
And my final question is, there was a recent budget. Your budget was set in that budget. It was not materially different, I think, from the prior budget. Do you have sufficient resources?
I do, thank you, Senator.
And in terms of now these two complaints, have you been able to bring in the additional support that you felt necessary to deal with them?
I have, thank you, Senator.
So you've just seen the video yourself. She didn't expressly say she has enough money, but she basically has. Budget's come down. Yes, I have sufficient. And she has sufficient resources as well. So there's no reason why she can't or couldn't investigate. The first paragraph of the statement, she put out a 6-page statement last week, Gail Furness did. And in the first paragraph, she talks about one of her functions is to investigate corruption allegations against NACC staff. And then the next sentence, she says, Commissioner Paul Brereton is a NACC staff member. So she's saying that's part of her role. So it's absolutely ridiculous. I think an analogy is, imagine the police saying, oh, look, we've done a cost-benefit analysis, but we're not going to investigate that crime against you because we don't see any benefit there. It's ridiculous. People would be screaming.
Now, speaking as a concerned member of the Australian public, I had a lot of faith in the work that David Shoebridge has done in this particular space, in Senate estimates in a lot of areas, but he's been particularly diligent around the National Anti-Corruption Commission. We've got a review of leadership because of Paul Brereton's resignation and another senior figure. So the current government have got to take steps to replace them. And I think they had suggestions that are going to overview the workings of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. Well, this is a really bad look. And particularly for me as a concerned citizen, if the Greens have stopped being as diligent as they were, because I can't believe that David Shoebridge just let this go through to the keeper as he did. Who is going to be the observers for setting up a more effective National Anti-Corruption Commission in the future?
Well, number one, it has to be the independent media and also social media users. A lot of the heavy lifting, and people don't realise, is being done by independent media, especially myself and my website. I'd have to be number one by quite a margin for following the National Anti-Corruption Commission. I've been following it from the start, and I'm basically the only journalist who has, and that should be no surprise because I run a judicial corruption website. So it's part of my focus is always going to be anything judicial, and the NACC is a quasi-judicial body. So it's really up to us to drive it as hard as possible. As I mentioned before, there was a journalist at The Guardian who's probably got one of the best gets ever when he put questions to the NACC and they responded saying, yes, the commissioner was in the meeting, he stayed in the meeting, he gave his opinion when he was asked and he gave his opinion when he wasn't asked. That's admission of guilt like no tomorrow. So it's up to all of us to keep the blowtorch on. In relation to David Shoebridge, I've published his videos on a regular basis. I put them in my articles. I put them on my YouTube channel. I've published videos from other Greens as well. And I was surprised, and I'll read it out. He responded last week when the NACC inspector, Gail Furness, published her statement. He responded and said he disagreed, and he gave 3 points why he disagreed. But at the end of it, he said this: while I disagree with this decision from the NACC inspector, I remain deeply grateful for the diligence and independence she has shown in her role. Respectful disagreements based on competing public interest principles have a place in any democracy. So he's basically thanked her. I remain deeply grateful. Well, what's he thanked her for? Nothing. Now, I wrote another article back in 2024, I think it was. Might have been 2025. And I had a pretty big swipe at David Shoebridge then for failing to raise the issues I raised just before in this video in relation to Paul Brereton by Gail Furness. They never asked her any tough questions. Hey, how come you limited the investigation back in 2024 to Paul Brereton? Why did others weren't investigating? All the evidence tying in the others at that meeting was publicly known. And they should have put the tough questions to her back then. They didn't. But I left it at that. He's done a lot of good work on corruption. He's probably the number one corruption fighter in federal parliament at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. Him and his colleague Barbara Pocock, who's done a lot of work with the consultancy that's come into Parliament House, I think is a concern that she's pursued with great vigour. So we admire that work, but that's why I'm really disappointed and stunned with the ease with which this is finished. And I'd suggest if anyone else is concerned and hearing this video, listening to it now, please share it as much as you can, because it's the work that Shane has been doing that we need to get out there.
Look, and just to finish off on that, back in 2024-25, when I wrote the article saying, look, and it wasn't just David Shoebridge, Helen Haynes, none of them asked any tough questions of Gail Furness, why she didn't dig deeper in relation to that original corruption investigation into Paul Brereton. One of the things I raised, and I'm trying to work it out too, I don't know why David Shoebridge has done that, but he's embarrassed himself by thanking Gail Furness and saying it's basically a difference of opinion. It's not a difference of opinion. There's no opinion to be had on anything because the investigations were swept under the carpet. The only thing I can think of is maybe the old attorney respect law was kicked in. I read about that in a sales book. I have a sales background, and good 10, 15, 20 years ago, Who Dares Sells, the salesperson was talking about the attorney respect law, where they look out for each other because one day one of them have the upper hand, next week, next month, the other might have the upper hand. So they look out for each other. And he called it attorney respect law. So I reflected back on that and I thought, well, maybe that's the reason. And in this latest article, I point out that both David Shoebridge and Gail Furness are both members of the New South Wales Bar. They're both barristers. So maybe something there's kicked in. I don't know, but whatever it is, they say everyone has their price. Here, I don't know if it's a price so much, but he's hit some threshold and he's decided to thank her. Maybe he's decided, look, I've been dropping the boot into too many judges and barristers and lawyers, Paul Brereton being one. I don't want to upset too many more. I don't know. Whatever it is, David Shoebridge's got a lot of questions to answer. I think, and over the next, I think people on social media aren't going to let it drop. And I think if he continues to support her, he's going to have a lot of questions to answer and he's going to make it a lot worse for himself. He's already got a lot of questions to answer. Why thank her and why say it's a difference of opinion?
Yeah, definitely. There's going to be a lot to play out in this space, but also very keen to see how I guess there's a committee structure, Shane, to set up the new leadership of the Anti-Corruption Commission, because I know that the Liberal Party were heavily involved with the Labor Party in setting it up in the first place, and they seem to have removed any independent observation from either Greens, independent politicians or other minor parties. It was set up by the two majors. It may be running exactly the way they wanted it to run. I'm not quite sure, but I think public perception is going to force a different hand in how the new commission is set up post Paul Brereton, but we'll wait with interest to see that.
Well, there's two things there. I want to clear the air on why Paul Brereton was appointed in the first place. I think there's a perception he did great work on the Brereton report, which was an investigation. I think it ran for 3 or 4 years or something into alleged war crimes in Afghanistan by Australian Defence Force personnel. And there's a perception he did a good job there. That's why he was appointed NACC commissioner. No. In that Brereton report, people started screaming basically right from the start it was published. People within the Defence Force, outside the Defence Force, they all complained because he wrote in there that senior officers should not be held accountable. And as soon as anyone with a legal background read that line or those lines, they said, no, it's not how the game works. And the prime example is, say, a construction company. If someone dies on a building site, even if the directors knew or didn't know that they should have taken better care to make sure it didn't happen, better not security, better safety, even if they didn't know, they can still be held accountable. It's because they're liable. It's negligence by them. They should have known. And the same with the senior officers within the Australian Defence Force. Even if they didn't know war crimes were being committed, they should have known. So they could be potentially held accountable. And when Paul Brereton wrote that in his report, people within the Defence Force said, no, this is wrong. People outside the Defence Force, lawyers, barristers, they said, you've got to be kidding yourself. They can be held accountable, and everyone knows. So there were complaints right from the start, and the government actually had an inquiry that overturned that part of his Brereton report because it was that dodgy. He was busted protecting his mates right from the start. And that's why he was appointed NACC commissioner, because they wanted someone who was going to protect people in senior positions within the government. And he was the man. So he wasn't appointed because he did a good job. He was appointed because he already had a record of protecting the people in senior management.
As I said, I think the commission was set up exactly the way it was intended to be set up, but whether they're going to have to change that, whether public opinion is going to force them to change how it's set up in the future, that's the thing I want to watch with great interest. And I was hoping that some of the other members of parliament from smaller parties would keep them honest in this area, but now you've got to be worried with the actions of David Shoebridge, how serious they're going to be.
Well, 100%. There's two things there. One, it's really about watching people over a long period if you want to see if people are honest or corrupt, because some of them are very, very good at hiding it. Some of the politicians aren't very good. They don't even try and hide it. Scott Morrison never used to try and hide his corruption. He just didn't care. But David Shoebridge has done a great job. I thought he was straight down the line. I called him out last year, or end of 2024-25. I called him out when he failed to question Gail Furness sufficiently, and he ignored the fact. I could write that off. Maybe he didn't read. I had to read the reports behind Gail Furness's report. I had to read the report by Alan Robertson to find out that he had been muzzled, and he could only investigate a certain Paul Brereton, not the others. So I realised as soon as I read his report that he had been muzzled. So I could cut David Shoebridge a bit of slack. Maybe he didn't have time to read the reports behind Gail Furness's report to find out what was happening. Even though I'd written an article about it, I assumed he had read the article. There's not that many journalists writing about it. But he's been caught out this time badly thanking her, which is disgraceful. And he's been caught out saying it's a difference of opinion. So we need to keep a close eye on him moving forward. I just want to make this one point too. 1.2. When Paul Brereton was appointed, there's a NACC oversight committee, which has been a toothless tiger, and David Shoebridge is part of it. I think they should all resign. I think Gail Furness needs to resign. But this time around, with the appointment of the new NACC commissioner, which will happen over the next few months, and there's also a deputy commissioner who resigned, they're going to have to fill her position as well. It's been posted on social media that the NACC Oversight Committee this time will be able to ask questions, in effect interview the prospective new NACC Commissioner. So that might help make it more accountable, or the process more accountable, I don't know. But apparently they weren't allowed to do that last time. So maybe there is an improvement there.
Fingers crossed, let's hope so. Shane, thank you again for your work. This has been another episode of Kangaroo Court Uncut podcast. As I said earlier, if this issue concerns you and other issues that Shane brings up, please share these videos around. We want more and more people to understand what is actually going on, and it's only the work of people like Shane that are digging this out. So please get it out as much as you can. I've enjoyed this conversation today, Shane. I thank you very much for the work. My name's Rob Cameron. You can attached to me at Community Radio in Geelong 94.7 The Pulse, but we'll be back next week with another edition of Kangaroo Court Uncut podcast.
And the reporting I do on the Kangaroo Court of Australia website, YouTube channel, and this podcast is 100% crowdfunded from viewers like yourself. It'd be greatly appreciated for your support. I've been running a campaign over the last 30-odd weeks, trying to get 200 new monthly supporters. Got 8 left to go. So if you want to be one of those 8, the details will be below this video on YouTube and also on my website. You can go to the donations page on my website. It's got all the donation options on there. And please do your bit and help shine a light on corruption and share this video on social media. And please hit the like and subscribe button and notification button on YouTube. That way you get notified when I publish new videos. Other than that, thank you for your time and have a good day.